Did you hear about a week ago we replayed a little bit of Lindsay's interview about the menstrual Avengers, this pretty pointed demonstration that took place when John Howard and several members of the Cabinet visited the Shoalhaven, with women pointing out the fact that GST was not applied to things such as condoms, and it was to tampons and menstrual pads. And they felt this was entirely unfair. I've only just learnt that the Commonwealth Health Minister is actually empowered to unilaterally declare any goods GST-free if it's important for the health of Australians. The latest has come from Senator David Leyonhjelm, who's called for the removal of the GST on breastfeeding aids, as well as things as such as tampons and other material, which he says the Health Minister could do without any problem whatsoever. Here he is talking to me earlier on this morning.
Under the GST Act, he has the authority to remove certain items from being subject to GST, essentially. He can declare them under the Act to be not subject to GST. He argues that he can only exercise that power with the consent of the states. We can't find any legislative backing for that claim.
What has been the history of this part of the Act? Has a Health Minister made that kind of declaration in the past?
Yes, he has in the past, although they claim that it was done with the consent of the states. As I said, we don't think there's any statutory obligation to do it. But of course, the whole GST arrangement is a cooperative agreement, if you like, between the states and territories and the Commonwealth, because the GST revenue is all shared with the states and territories, and presumably there would be some sort of consequences for the relationships between them all if the Commonwealth acted unilaterally. But they certainly have the power to do it, and in some instances, I believe they certainly should.
Well, the history, as you've suggested, includes making that decision on condoms, lubricants, folic acid, sunscreen and nicotine patches and gums. It doesn't seem unreasonable for the Commonwealth Health Minister to write to the state ministers and say, well, how about we remove it on breastfeeding aids? Could you imagine any of them would object?
No, I agree, and the amount of revenue that's raised is absolutely paltry. So I agree. There's no reason to do it. We had this issue over GST on tampons and sanitary pads, bumbling along now for months and months and months, totally unnecessarily. And
well, it's been bumbling along for 18 years or so. In fact, we did a story only last week on a pretty famous protest here of the menstrual Avengers pelting various ministers with tampons, and it's still going on. Why? Do you know what the history of this debate is and why this has resisted the Commonwealth Health Minister's usage of these powers?
Yes, they just don't seem to want to go to the states and say, well, if they think they need the consent of the states, and I argue that that's not needed, but if they're really so sensitive about the views of the states and territories, then they can go to them and say, okay, look, this is a problem. It's a ridiculous idea that various things can be GST free, and other things are subject to GST. We think we should fix up this anomaly. Can you agree to that? And the most recent example is the one I raised this week in the Senate, is breastfeeding aids, breast pumps basically. They're subject to GST, but infant formula, which is an alternative obviously to breast milk, is not.
And yet the line that John Howard and Peter Costello drew all those years ago was fresh food.
Yeah.
And that line kept being moved. There's no way you consider infant formula to be fresh food.
No, you can't. And at the end of the day, it just gets down to the feels, What feels good? Oh, well, breast infant formula is a good thing. Let's leave it out. Whoever thought of breast pumps? Oh, no, I've never heard of them. We'll put them we'll make them subject to GST. It's a ridiculous situation that we're in. But if we're not going to fix the system properly and have something more rational, and an example of something more rational would be New Zealand, which has the GST applies to everything. And if that was the case, I'd agree to that, provided there was a corresponding reduction in income tax so that we weren't worse off. But if we're not going to have a more rational across-the-board fix of the GST system, at least fix up the anomalies, and the Commonwealth Minister can exercise his power. He has done, as you pointed out, and it's absolutely insane to have infant formula free of GST, while breast pumps and anything else that's needed for mothers to feed their babies using breast milk is subject to GST.
And would you agree that there's an unfortunate gender symbolism in condoms being GST free, which whatever else you think of them are optional, whereas sanitary pads, which are compulsory for any woman beyond puberty, have GST applied to them?
Yes, it makes you think that whoever was deciding what's in and what's out of the GST system might have been a man. For a certain
Really? You think so?
Yeah, I think there's a fair chance of that, because it just seems to me that they just, certain things just never entered their mind. It makes you wonder whether vasectomies are subject to GST. I don't think they are.
So Senator David Leyonhjelm talking to us earlier on this morning.